Revelations in chapter 2. Hopefully I remember which way this goes. I've turned it on. Are you ready for it to be turned on? There we go. Okay, so Revelations chapter 2, and we're going to start here. Why isn't it working? Go. Why is it working sometimes and not other times? Now it's gone. Okay, that'll do. So we're looking at a region in Asia Minor, and you'll see there's the churches that are mentioned in Revelations 2 and 3. And they actually form a bit of a trade route, if you like, and that sort of highlights the main road that would have gone between the towns. So if we read in chapter 2 and verse 1, we'll be looking at Ephesus tonight. Okay, so unto the angel of the church of Ephesus, write, these things saith he that holdeth the 7 stars in his right hand, who walks in the midst of the 7 golden candlesticks. I'll have to hold it up there to work. I know thy works, and thy labour, and thy patience, and how thou cannot bear them which are evil, and thou hast tried them which say they are apostles and are not, and hast found them liars. And hast borne, and hast patience, and for my name's sake hast laboured, and hast not fainted. Nevertheless, I have somewhat against thee, because thou hast left thy first love. So this is probably what this little passage is most well known for, about the Ephesian Church being accused of leaving their first love, and we're going to look at that tonight. If we read on, verse 5, remember therefore from whence thou art fallen, and repent, and do the first works, or else I will come unto thee quickly, and will remove thy candlestick out of his place, except thou repent. Go. I reckon the battery is dying in this. But this thou hast, that thou hatest the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. I have to push it really hard for it to go. He that has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says unto the churches. To him that overcomes will I give to eat of the tree of life. So the main point I'll be looking into tonight is that verse 4 about the church being told that they had left their first love. So that's really what I want to look at tonight. So we're going to go back in history a little bit and look at Ephesus itself. Ephesus existed long before it was mentioned in the Bible. Excuse me. So it was a Greek colony back in the 10th century BC. Is when it sort of the name Ephesus first came into being. Previously to that, it had been settled by different kingdoms, the Hittites and various ones, but the Greeks are the ones that gave it the name Ephesus. We're talking about 200 years or so after the time of when the Battle of Troy was supposed to have happened. So the story goes that Troy was the main capital, or the main kingdom of that region in Asia Minor, sort of northwestern Turkey. And once that had fallen to the Greeks took that as a green light to expand and to colonise the region. So all up and down the coast, they moved across from Greece into Turkey and started building settlements and cities and from there. So this is what that battle's most well known for, the horse. That is actually in Troy, and if you look really closely, you might see Stevie poking a head out of that window, if you've got good eyes. Now, like I said, it dates back earlier than that, but we're sort of going to try and move forward pretty quickly. So it was colonised by an Athenian prince, and I'm not going to probably try and say all these names, but we'll say he's an Athenian prince. And over time, more and more Greeks came over to the area, and because they were kinsmen, they sort of formed little leagues. Ephesus was part of the Ionian League, which is sort of the region of Greece where they'd all come from. And you'll see here on this map here, there's a bit of that green area, and you'll see Ephesus is down there somewhere. I wish I could point at this and it would work there. But so there's about 12 cities all told, and they sort of formed a little alliance, if you like. And then over time, we know history, kingdoms come and kingdoms go, lots of battles. So I'm just going to try and flick through a few. The Lydian kingdom came along in 560 BC, so about 400 or 500 years later. Lydia is a region we are familiar with in the Bible. This guy came along, Croesus, I think his name was, and he's the guy that actually funded the first temple of Artemis, which is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. So that's this pretty fellow here. He was a bit foolish though, because he got a bit greedy. Ephesus wasn't enough, and he took on his neighbour, who was a guy by the name of Cyrus. You might have heard of Cyrus the Great. And history records Cyrus and not Croesus, so I guess you can imagine who won. This is really getting annoying. There he is, Cyrus the Great, and he forms Persian Empire, and again we're familiar with that in the Bible. I'm really just flicking through a few things here. The next sort of important part of the timeline is what's known as the Greco-Persian Wars. And they go on for about 50 years or so, toing and froing, and there's lots of famous stories come from this time. Probably the main one, well, if you've seen your movies, 300 and those sort of stories come from this time, but the main one I think of is the Battle of Marathon, where the guy runs 40 miles or whatever it is from the battle to Athens to warn them that they're all about to be in battle. This is going nowhere. Okay, so that's just a little art relief of from that time, the Greeks and the Persians. Moving on from there, Alexander the Great comes along a little bit later, about another 150 years or so, and he actually reclaims a lot of land that's been lost to the Persians, including Ephesus in 334 BC, and that's him there with a beautiful lock of hair. Alexander the Great dies. Some of you might know some of this history, so I'll just try and get through quickly. And he has no heir, so his empire falls apart pretty quickly, and his generals sort of fight amongst themselves, and eventually we sort of end up with 4 main empires, which are on the map there. So you've got the grey one, the purple or pink, orange, and this green and yellow one is sort of one kingdom together. And over time, all 4 of these empires or kingdoms run Ephesus. So you can sort of see the picture that Ephesus has gone through a lot in its history. Lots of different people, lots of different ideas, lots of different cultures, and along with that comes lots of different religious beliefs as well. Eventually, Ephesus comes into the hands of Rome in 129 BC. This is one place that Rome didn't actually have to conquer, it was given to them, which was rather kind. And here they are rolling into town, just saying thanks for coming. At about that time, Ephesus is named the capital of the Roman province Asia, which is this yellow province here, and if I zoom in a little bit, you might be able to see Ephesus down there. So it becomes a rather important city in the Roman Empire. This is an artist's impression of what Ephesus looked like at its height. So just a few things to point out. This here is the theatre, estimated to hold about 25,000 people in there, which is where, if you remember, we'll touch on a few of these things later, but Paul, they want to drag him in there to talk about Diana of the Ephesians and all that story that happens there. This is the temple of Artemis, or later becomes Diana here. And you can see it's right on a harbour, right on a port. Now that port slowly over time disappears, just due to silt build-up and things like that. And then we've got any spare batteries? There we go. So we move along another 300 years or so, and we're going to sort of come back and touch on a few of these things. The Goths invade most of the Roman Empire, including Ephesus, and that's them. They're a really friendly bunch of people, if you know your history. Okay, so from about this time, Ephesus sort of starts to fall apart. It's past its heyday, and lots of things happen now, and it sort of winds to a close. Constantinople comes on the scene. So if you know your history, Emperor Constantine is the one who converted to Christianity, so-called, and following him, Christianity becomes the state religion of the Roman Empire. So Constantinople is his capital, so because it's nearby, it sort of becomes the main centre of the empire, and Ephesus, I guess, is neglected. This is just an artist's impression of Constantinople in its early years, which is Istanbul as we know it today. Okay, a few things to point out. In about the 5th or 6th century, we have the Basilica of St. John is built in Ephesus, and I'll come back to why shortly. That's just a bit of an impression of what that looked like there. When you go to Ephesus today, they've found some ruins and started to reconstruct things. You can see it was quite a large building, about 120 metres long or so quite significant, especially in those days. That's sort of a bit of a, if you imagine that map before, this is up the other way around. So this is that square area at the front, this is where the domes were. So quite a large building, and a lot of these photos are old from when I was there, so I imagine they've been reconstructed even more so since. Again, just a few photos of what it looks like, just so we get a bit of a mental picture. And this part here is interesting, so I'm not sure if you can read that there, so I'll go in one more. In the Basilica of St. John claims to be built on the tomb of St. John, which is John the Apostle. So a lot of, particularly in Orthodox and Catholic circles, it's believed that John lived his last days in Ephesus. Lots of different reasons for that, which I'll touch on. But yeah, so that church is claimed to be built on his tomb. It was built by this Emperor Justinian, who was known as a bit of a builder. He liked gold pictures of himself as well. So being Byzantine, famous for their mosaics, that's why there's no paintings, it's all sort of like that. But Justinian actually also builds the Hagia Sophia, or the Hagia Sophia, 537, which still stands today in Istanbul. This is what it looked like originally, and then I've got some photos of what it looks like now. So Istanbul's been changed from a Christian city to a Muslim city, so the Muslims added some minarets and other bits and pieces that suit their religion and their culture. So again, quite a significant building. This is about 1,500 years old or so. So I'm an architect, so that's probably why I've got a lot of pictures of buildings. Quite ornate, quite rich. This is what's left of it now. When the Muslims took over, they sort of whitewashed everything, because in the Quran they don't believe in imagery and all that sort of stuff. Like that is quite common in Christian cathedrals and things like that. So this is just what's been, I guess, found or restored, which is quite amazing, really, and you consider how old it is. So like I said, Ephesus by this time has more or less fallen off the map. So there's a major earthquake in 614. Then it's pillaged and invaded by various different peoples throughout the centuries. By the time of the Crusades, it's noted that Ephesus is more of a village than a city, and the Crusaders were surprised. They were imagining this big, glorious city. Obviously, there's no internet back then for them to check where things are at. 1390, it falls into the Ottoman Empire, which is where it stayed for a very long time. In fact, Turkey today is a remnant of the Ottoman Empire, so I guess you could say it's still in their hands. By the 15th century, it's completely abandoned as a city, and I've got some photos here to show you. It is nothing but a bunch of ruins, and these are organised ruins because I'm imagining they didn't find them just standing there like this. So that's sort of the main street winding down towards the harbour that used to be there. That big green area, that big green open field, that used to be the harbour that led out to the ocean. So you can see it's about 5 kilometres inland now, so that's how much the river has silted up the region. Quite popular as a tourist destination today, as it was back in its heyday. It was known for its. This was a library, so knowledge. It was top of the field in medicine. All these different fields, I guess, that made it one of the biggest cities in the world. This is that theatre. Quite impressive. About 25,000 people or so it could hold, they estimate. If I keep going, this is standing from up the top looking down. And I also got an aerial photo of it. So you can see it's quite significant. And you can imagine in the day when Paul and Timothy and people like that were there, you can imagine what it might have been like for them. Okay, so the Lady of Ephesus. So now I'm going to go back a little bit. So in Ephesus, they worshipped a goddess called Artemis. I'll just get my notes because I haven't been moving those. So Artemis was a goddess of lots of different things: the hunt, the wilderness, wild animals, all those things sort of go together, I guess. Nature, vegetation, but then childbirth, chastity, and the moon. So she was a very multi-talented goddess. She was the daughter of Zeus and Leto, who are also gods. There we go. She's the twin sister of Apollo, another god. And the story of their birth is that she was born first, and because there was no midwife around, she helped her mother deliver her brother. So she was a very clever baby. I've been to the birth of 3 of my 3 children. I certainly didn't see that happen. Anyway, so that's the story of Artemis. Prior to the Greeks coming to the area, there was another deity worshipped. Oh, sorry, I've just got a few more photos here. So these are different incarnations of Artemis, later known as Diana to the Romans, which is what she's mentioned in the Bible. And you can see that there's lots of different theories about some of the iconography on here, but the sort of the prevalent thinking is that these sort of bead-shaped things are eggs, because she was known as the goddess of fertility, of midwifery and fertility. So that's how that's represented. And these come from all over the place: Egypt, all over the Mediterranean, Middle East area. Oops, that's got backwards, that's the wrong one. Okay, so prior to the Greeks, the Anatolians, or the people that were there before, they worshipped a goddess known as Kibble or Sybil, depending on which way you say it, which part you're from. She was known as a mother goddess. Okay, so this is where we start to see a few things crossing over. So that's her there. When the Greeks came, this mythology of Greek mythology, and it's pretty common in all pagan circles really, that the gods, where they moved, they were sort of assimilated other gods' attributes, I guess. So Artemis also becomes known as a mother goddess, so too Diana, etc. So this is her temple, which was one of the ancient wonders of the world. Very big building for its time. So we're talking about 550 BC. This was built originally by that Lydian king that I mentioned earlier. 115 metres long, 55 metres wide. Though the columns, there's 127 of them that are 18 metres high, like each. So it's quite a significant building. I imagine a lot of manpower to create such a thing. Entirely built of marble. So it was very expensive building as well, although I imagine a lot of the labour was free. So this is just a reconstruction of what that looked like. It's actually a miniature. So yeah, you can see it's quite a nice old classical building, the sort of stuff that I had to draw 100 times over. In uni, 356, it's destroyed by fire by an arsonist who wanted to become famous. That's literally why he burnt it down. Bit crazy, but there you go. It's part of the story. So if you remember, Alexander the Great came along in the 4th century. He offers to rebuild the temple on his way through to defeating the Persians. But the Ephesians tell him it would be improper for one god to build a temple for another. So that's how highly they thought of him. So they sort of fund it themselves. And this version is what becomes the wonder of the ancient world. And there you go there. So the next version is bigger. They build it up because because of the river coming through, the ground was quite swampy. So they sort of built it up on a pedestal, so to speak, to try and protect it a little bit better. So there you have it. That's the Temple of Artemis. So this is what Paul would have been confronted with when he came to Ephesus. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's eventually destroyed by the Goths, and it's never really rebuilt. It sort of slowly becomes derelict. This column is something they found. It's actually in the British Museum. So that's obviously the very bottom and the very top, with about 16 metres missing in the middle. But yeah, so... And this is what, when I went there, this is what it looked like. So they've put sort of half of one column back together with a few bits and pieces. You can see this sort of swampy, that's just sort of like subsurface water. It's not like a river or anything. And the temple today is not much good for anything except a bird's nest, if you can see that, if it goes there. So that's the current occupants. Artemis is gone and these guys are in her place. The theory of how, if I touch back quickly, the theory of when it was burnt down, the story goes that it burnt down the same night Alexander the Great was born, which is why he wanted to rebuild it. And Artemis wasn't there to defend her temple because she was helping birth him. So that's the story. Lots of legends and stories when you look into these things. So when we come to Ephesus in the Bible, we first read of in Acts chapter 18, when Paul sort of briefly passes through. He then goes back to Ephesus in Acts 19 and 20 and spends a period of time there converting and establishing the first church there, I guess. He later writes his epistle to them from his captivity in Rome. And again, as we touched on earlier, the Revelation chapter 2 comes about 30 years later, also addressed to the church. So by that stage, it's established, and obviously, judging by the letter, in a bit of trouble. So just touching on a few things here, because I don't have time to read through it all. So Paul visits Ephesus briefly, like I said. He brings Priscilla and Aquila with him, and when he moves on, they stay. They convert a man called Apollos, who becomes a key figure in the early church, particularly in Greece and in Corinth in particular. So Ephesus plays a part in the greater picture as well. So, like I said, he returns to Ephesus on his third journey, and this time he spends a good 2 years or so. This is about dead, I reckon. About 2 years or so in Ephesus. And the thought is, there's quite a large revival, and we can read about that in Acts chapter 19 and 20, where, he causes a bit of a stir with the locals regarding the temple and their trade of creating the shrines and the relics for the temple. Just one story there in Acts, I think it's in Acts 19, the end of Acts 19, I think, where those that are converted all bring their books. It says of the curious arts, and they come and burn them. And it says that they're worth 50,000 pieces of silver. I did a little bit of a look into that. So a piece of silver was roughly a day's wage in those times. So 50,000 days' wages. So I just, quick calculation on the average Australian wage, it's about $14.5 million just burnt up in the street. So you can imagine, caused quite a stir. Imagine if you saw that today. I don't know if people would watch it or try and stop it. And that's just a little picture of it starting. Not $14.5 million worth there, I don't reckon. It must be just the start of it. Okay, so prior to Paul coming to Ephesus, we understand that there were already Jews there. In Acts chapter 2, it's mentioned that there are people from Asia on the day of Pentecost. So that's referring to people from presumably Ephesus, or if not directly that region, because, as I said, Ephesus was the capital. And also in Acts chapter 6, where Stephen is being questioned and eventually killed, there's people there from Asia as well. So it was and when Paul himself goes to Ephesus, it says that he disputes with them in the synagogue. So there's a long-standing history of Jewish people already there. So then Paul writes his epistle to the Ephesians, and he leaves Timothy there, which you can read in various accounts, and it's sort of commonly thought that Timothy becomes the bishop of Ephesus, and then by extension, now bishop of Ephesus, that's sort of like a mainstream Christian term that when you're reading history, that's what they refer to them as. Bishops were before popes, he was important. Then I lost my train of thought. So it's assumed then by that he is actually the angel that Revelation 2 is referring to. The angel of the church of Ephesus is talking presumably to Timothy, or if not Timothy directly, then I guess whoever came after him. So we have Paul's warning to the elders in Acts chapter 20, where he warns them that, beware, I had it written down here somewhere, beware of those amongst you, beware of changing the doctrine, all these different things, that he was worried that when he left them, things would change. John warned them again in Revelation chapter 2. And then if we look at just the historical culture of pagan worship in Ephesus, it sort of leads you to think that it wasn't a long, successful church. And we're going to look at a couple of things now just to wind down on. So, like I said earlier, it's believed that John, the apostle, spent his latter days in Ephesus. So here he wrote the Gospel of John, allegedly. From Ephesus, he's taken into captivity and exiled to Patmos, the island where he writes Revelation. Patmos is actually just nearby to Ephesus, so it's sort of another part of the theory. When he's on the island, he receives the vision and writes the book of Revelation, or the letters at the time. Eventually he's pardoned and returns to Ephesus, where he lives out his days. And he writes, the epistles of John. Now there's a legend of John in Ephesus, and this is something that's still spoken by the locals today. If you went and did a tour, this is something they would tell you, that John actually ascended into heaven from Ephesus, similar to other stories, I guess, Elijah and things like that. So what the story goes that He was in his cave where he used to run a little church, and from there he ascended into heaven, and nobody could find him because he was just gone. When they sort of figured that he had died, they sort of sealed up the church, and it was known as John's tomb, but it sort of became lost, I guess. About 200 years later, when Constantine comes to power, and he sort of is investigating a lot of early Christian myths and legends because he wants to understand Christianity, because he wants to rule these people. He's trying to convert, allegedly, so he wants to know, where's Jesus buried, where's John, all these things. He comes and finds the tomb, allegedly, and funnily enough, when they find it, there's nothing in it. Excuse me. So in our, I guess, modern skeptical society, we would be like, oh yeah, that's because it's not true. There's nothing in there, there's no proof. Not back then. The fact that he wasn't there and there was nothing in there, to them that proved the story was true, that he ascended into heaven. It's funny how times change. So what they did then is they sort of made it became a holy site, and eventually, like I said, Justinian comes along and builds a church on top of it, and you can still see the remains of that today. Yes, I've just said here, it goes from a church to a tomb to a church. They believe that the dust around the temple site or the tomb site was holy, so pilgrims would come and collect it and take it back home with them to perform all manner of miracles and healings that they needed in their lives. And like I said, Basilica of St. John is built upon it. Now, we get to Mary. So local legends believe that Mary lived and died in Ephesus. Now, part of the theory behind that is that, if you remember, when Jesus is on the cross, he speaks to John and says, "Behold thy mother," and he says to Mary, "Behold thy son." So the thought is that where John goes, Mary follows. So when John goes to Ephesus and is in exile in Patmos, Mary's there somewhere in Ephesus doing who knows what. There's a little house there known as the House of the Virgin Mary, where it's believed she lived, and this is it here. You can go and visit it today, and surprisingly enough, there's a little shrine in there where you can worship Mary. So, I'm just going to try and wrap up quickly here. The first church in the world dedicated to Mary. Where do you think that would be? If you were going to take a guess, you'd probably guess Rome, I would think, because Roman Catholic Church is known for their worship of Mary. It was actually in Ephesus. It was the first church dedicated to Mary. It's called the Church of Mary, very good imagination, later known as the Church of the Councils. The reason for that is that in the 3rd and 4th centuries, there are councils there, the ecumenical councils, where they decide what's doctrine, what's not, etc. And interestingly, at the Council of Ephesus, that's the remains there of the church. It was quite a big building originally. Interestingly, at the Council of Ephesus, the main item on the agenda was, what do we actually call Mary? What's her official title? So there was two camps. On one camp, they wanted to call it, this is in the Greek, Christotokos, I'm sure that's not how you say it, Christotokos, or Christ bearer, mother of Christ. The other camp wanted to call her Theotokos, or God bearer, mother of God. So one camp wanted to call her the mother of Christ, and one camp wanted to call her the mother of God. The Theos won the day, and that's when it became written in stone that Mary was the mother of God, and all the homage and prayer to Mary, all that sort of stuff followed from this point. So it happened in Ephesus. So this leads to the first major schism of the church, or the church, mainstream Christianity. You've got the West, which becomes the Catholic Church, the Latin Church, and the east becomes the Orthodox Church or the Greek Church. And their main originally, their main point of difference was this theory on Mary. What is Mary? Is she the mother of God, or is she the mother of Christ? But as we know, it was more than theology. There's politics, there's power. These guys ran kingdoms. They weren't really worried about that kind of thing. So, Ephesus, long tradition of worshipping female deities. We have Sybil or Kibble first, followed by Artemis, who then becomes Diana. So you've got, Anatolian, Greek, Roman, and then I've got here Christian goddess, Mary. It died. That's okay. Oh, that was my last slide. That's why it died. So, in summary, and I know I've blurted out a lot of information, so you probably haven't kept hold of most of it, but the church at Ephesus was warned for having left their first love. So most Bible commentaries or Bible dictionaries and that, they talk about, what was the first love? Was it Jesus? Was it the Word of God? Was it serving the Lord? Or, something like that. And that's sort of where most thoughts follow, that sort of thought. What was their first love? They need to get back to that. This in Revelation it talks about repent and return to the first works, get back. What I was more interested in is, what did they leave to? What did they leave it for? So what took place of their first love? And my theory, and it's just a theory, so you can take it or leave it, but my theory is that the old worship of Artemis and Diana, that came back. And she had a new name, and her name was Mary. And it's just interesting that it's in Ephesus, of all places, who their warning in Revelation was about, don't leave your first love, or you have left it, you need to get back to it. Mary suddenly appears. Now, a lot of this history is probably not true, which sort of, I guess, for me, further reinforces my thought that, they wanted this to be so true that all of a sudden Mary lives in Ephesus, she dies in Ephesus. All of a sudden there's a church in Ephesus named after Mary. All of a sudden in Ephesus, she's known as the Mother of God. I just find it interesting. So I guess my thought tonight is, that's what they left. They left serving the Lord and they started serving Mary. And I guess, when you read through all of that, read through Ephesians, read through Revelation, read the epistles of John, all those things. When I came to this thought and then reread it, a lot of things jump out at you. So, that's enough. I'll leave it there. Amen. All right, we've gone a little bit over, but hopefully you're still awake, and we might just turn the lights back on if we can, and we'll just have a short time of prayer before we close off tonight.